Welcome to Heartistry. This is Farah, Yasmeen, Shaikh, and we just heard about the amazing guest that we have on today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Devanshi Somaiya.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and such an honor to speak with your audience.
Well, it is wonderful to meet you. And I always like to, when there's a little sort of backstory as to how I know of a guest or have an existing relationship, I love to kind of bring that into the fold. And you are a very longtime friend of a dear friend of mine, Anjali Rao, who is also a former guest here on Heartistry. And as I also mentioned in the introduction, in a little while, we're going to have actually the daughter of Anjali, Ayana Rao, who I get to say I'm lucky enough to call her also a student of mine, join for part of the conversation. And we'll talk, of course, when we welcome her in, we will make all of that make sense. But already knowing we share somebody that you and I love so much in common, I know this is going to be a great conversation. So,
I know that too.
well,
Wonderful getting to know you.
likewise, likewise. Well, we have so much to get into again about the amazing work that you've been doing over the years and sort of your professional journey, if you will. But I always love to hear from my guests a little bit more about sort of your personal family history, your origin story, if you will.
Sure, I think that helps people understand our positionality a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
please.
my parents were here in the 70s and I lived here till I was 77.
Okay.
And then we moved back to India and I spent my high school years, my formative years and through my high school years in India, in Bangalore, which is where I met our mutual friend, Anjali Rao. And then we went through high school together and we were both at a convent. And, in the convent setting, there's a lot of sort of social goodness, equity, fight for a cause sort of wiring inbuilt during your formative years. And
Hmm.
that stayed with, I think, both Anjali and I over, our paths then diverged and I came to the US when I was 16. Anjali came a little bit later. I came here and did my undergraduate, my med school, and my residency all in Houston. And then started practicing in about 2003 as an OB-GYN. And during that time, because of the wiring that was kind of inbuilt into us,
Hmm.
I took a lot of volunteer trips. I took about 7 or 8 trips to Guatemala.
Wow.
And in Guatemala, we would, land in Guatemala City and then take off into the mountains. And we would go to this place called Quiche. And Quiche is, there's no grade 3 hospital or a trauma
Hmm.
center in Quiche for about 200, miles.
Wow.
So we would go every week, the week before Father's Day, and they knew we were coming. A team of surgeons. It was just clinical care. And we would go and we would take care of these women who had waited a year to see us, and they would come
Wow.
down their mountains and stay at the hospital through, the first few days after their surgery. And then they would climb up the mountains and go back to their care. And
Hmm.
obviously that was the first inkling of how much disparity there is in my comfortable operating room here
Yeah.
compared to what we were seeing in Guatemala. And then after that, I got more and more interested in the global health scene and spent a month in Africa,
Hmm.
in Zambia. And again, it was the disparity was very, very obvious. It was a 200-bed hospital, a lot of HIV in Zambia, one blood pressure machine, one oxygen tank. There were rolling blackouts where we would lose electricity for about 8 hours every day. And we knew when we
Hmm.
were losing electricity, and so we would time our surgeries around the electrical availability. And, if we had an emergency and we didn't have electricity, we would use our iPhone lights to operate.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think it was at that point I pivoted from understanding that this was not just a provider deficiency, this was an infrastructural deficiency.
Hmm.
And, solving this problem, to solve this problem, just going and spending a week or a month and filling in wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. We really needed to
Mm.
think of things at a more systemic level, which is when I started my master's in public health at Johns Hopkins. So I was working full time, doing that on the side. And I started to learn more and more during those 3 or 4 years about, exactly, what the scope of the problem is in all these different countries,
Mm.
and that a cookie cutter approach doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so I worked in private practice till about 21, and at that point pivoted to public health here in the US. I worked for the city of Houston in family planning, and then sort
Wow.
of moved on to India for cervical cancer prevention.
Amazing. My goodness. I mean, you just encapsulated years, not just in quantity of time, but I can imagine the number of environments, scenarios, situations you witnessed, even in the time that you took us through right now. And I'm just curious, you mentioned you were doing that work in Houston and then started going to do the work in Guatemala. And, I certainly, what I really try to avoid is generalizing about South Asian culture.
Hmm.
And yet, I also have curiosity and question because I think it's also important to call out the diversity that exists within it, and not diversity at sort of a superficial level. But I'm
Hmm.
curious what level of encouragement was happening for you in the home. Was it always, I mean, you mentioned your education and being educated in that convent environment, but I'm also curious, were you getting the
Right.
familial support and encouragement to do this work?
Yeah, so I know both. I was married during those early years, and I was married to a Pakistani Muslim. And in Islam, there is a big component of giving back to the community and
Right.
charity being, a big part of your everyday life. So, that was not a problem. Taking a week off and going, was very encouraged. In Before my married life and after my married life, I belonged to a family of Gandhians. My uncle never got
Mm.
married, and worked, to promote Gandhian philosophy and causes, and a way of life that is very simple and
Mm.
focused on giving. So I was very fortunate to
Mm.
have a lot of support in my immediate family and in my circle of friends, through the layers of the onion of relationships.
Right.
I was very fortunate to always be able to source that support from some part of it or the other. Um,
Beautiful.
I was lucky.
Yeah. Ah. Let's go ahead. We'll take our first pause here. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah Yasmeen Shaikh, and today we are speaking with Dr. Devanshi Somaiya. And, we're hearing a little bit about sort of the early years of your profession. And I can't help but think, I mean, we're certainly again going to get closer to the present. And you mentioned you sort of left off in what you were sharing with us that you did end up going back to India. But whether the work that you're doing now, being
Hmm.
based for the most part still in or back in India, but
Hmm.
even the other work that you were doing, Africa, Guatemala, whatnot,
Hmm.
I cannot help but think about present day realities. Um, all of the same scenarios as far as access and things like that. Maybe they've evolved and gotten a little bit better, but we know the need is still far outweighs
Hmm.
what is provided, right? So this brings me to institutions like USAID. And
Okay.
I'm just curious to know, as somebody who's really been working on the front line, if you will, and internationally. So, is that anything that is either directly impacting you? Would it have impacted the programs and offerings and services that you were a part of? Any
Hmm.
thoughts? Yes.
So there's a North-South community, right, of people who come together to put their minds and their thoughts and their wisdom together to create programs. And USAID is a big part of creating that northern and southern, group of communities. Um, I mean, what works in Africa through USAID or the Gates Foundation, when we meet for our conferences together, that
Mm,
wisdom is shared. And what
mm,
USA, what programs and philanthropies do is is nurture and incubate those areas of wisdom in different areas, in different realms. And so I think it's very important. What I learn um, here in India through my cervical cancer screening program is something I share on both a local, national, and a global platform. And most of our work is privately funded or funded through
Mm,
grants we get through the NIH or the Indian equivalent, which is the ICMR,
mm,
and other small philanthropies. But when you take funding and a belief in long-term work with outcomes that are not going to be quarter based, but year based or multi-year based, it takes a type of patience and it takes a
mm,
type of financial capacity to have that patience. And I
mm,
think that's what organizations like USAID and larger philanthropies and organizations like the NIH or the UK equivalent bring to the table is instead of finding short-term solutions, they give you some cushion to think in the larger picture and to draw out your solutions in a more sustainable way.
mm. Ah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yet we don't always think of it in that level of detail, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right,
And
right.
that very response makes me think about what you said too, as far as what was calling you therefore to go back and get your master's in public health.
Mm,
And I just want to, I'm relatively familiar with public health, but it's interesting. I can't say I could speak to it because it's actually a very broad
mhm,
sector,
mhm.
one. And can you just, in your own words, just sort of maybe if there is somebody wondering, what is this idea? What is public health? Because
Right.
anything that you can do to demystify that for any
Sure, no,
person.
absolutely. So, there are many components to health, right? I mean, there's women's health, there's nutrition, there is child health, there is infectious diseases, there is all of these. But when you're a physician, you're looking at an individual level, right? You have different specialties of medical care, and you're dealing with one person. And you're dealing with the here and now. Like, let's take heart disease, for example, right?
Mm,
You're looking at cholesterol, diabetes, blood pressure, smoking as the four main risk factors for heart disease, and each individual provider is trying to control and optimize those risk factors for an individual.
right.
Public health is when you start looking at it from a different focal point. If you want to compare this to a microscope, you're zoomed in with
Mm,
individual medicine for individual medical care, but then you zoom out from a community perspective for public health. So
right.
you're starting to look at larger issues in terms of both health risk factors as well as the environment that creates certain behaviors, whether that's food deserts, whether that
Yeah.
is smoking policy or tobacco policy, whether that is food lobbies. And you're looking at it from a political lens. You're looking at it through a economic lens. You're looking at it through a
Mm,
sustainability lens. You're looking at it from a medical health lens as well, but your
right.
approach is just a lot broader. And I
Right.
think that's what the difference between public health and medicine is.
Thank
Like
you.
individual medicine.
Yeah. No, thank you. That was exactly what I was hoping you'd take us to, is understanding sort of the bigger picture, even though there are of sort of segmentations within it, for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Right.
Well, speaking of public health, we heard again in our introduction of you a little bit about this organization that you founded. Can you talk to us about that? What is it? How did it come to be? You left off sort of in the idea and the fact that you went back to India. So when you went back to India, and lead us to when you came to finding the institute.
So actually, I wasn't the one who found the institute. The
I
institute
see.
was
Okay.
founded by Dr. Purnima Madhavan and Dr. Carl Kripp. They're a husband-wife team. They're originally from that area, from
Okay.
Bangalore. She went to medical college in Mysore. And then they came to the US and went through their academic careers. She did her master's in public health and her PhD at Berkeley in your neighborhood,
Mhm. Yes.
and then became an epidemiologist. So she had a medical background from India, and then furthered her career through her PhD here at Berkeley. And then for her PhD thesis, she wanted to focus a lot of her work in low resource settings, especially India. And so she went back to Mysore and set up this institute in 2007, the Public
Mm.
Health Research Institute of India. And so when I went back in 22, I benefited to 15 years of foundational work by the couple and the organization.
Yeah.
The organization has about 27 people, and they had made a lot of community inroads, have a solid research and scientific background. They both teach at University of Arizona here, so I could relate to the system and their way of thinking.
Right.
So I actually got a lucky break, a huge lucky break,
Mm.
when I was able to find this institute and make it my home. And so I already have a team of counselors in place. I have already a research team in
Right.
place. I have a data management team in place. I have a core admin team in place. And there's already three physicians, and I joined the physician group. What I bring to the table is I have expertise in cervical cancer prevention through my
Right.
training, all the way from medical school through my career. And that is my subject matter expertise. And we just the marriage between my skill and their infrastructure and capacity works really well. And I was able to grow their cervical cancer screening program. But
Mm.
really, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into setting the foundation and making inroads, which is the hardest part by the team before I even got there.
Mm. Sure. Let's go ahead. We'll take our second pause here.
Okay.
Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah, and today I am speaking with Dr. Devanshi Somaiya. And we've started to hear a little bit about the Public Health Research Institute of India. Those two eyes, I'm always afraid I'm going to flip those. um,
Common
so,
mistake.
oh, good. It's not just me. um, so, this work that you're doing and the work,
Mhm.
therefore, of the Institute, you mentioned cervical cancer screening. So it is on the ground, it is providing service. Um,
Mhm.
when I think sometimes of a research institute, it can feel a little bit like we are doing the research that will then get carried out by
Mm.
others. But it sounds like it's a mix of all of the above.
Yes, yes. So there's a field in public health called implementation research. And implementation science has to do with, the textbook definition is to fill the no-do gap. So you have an intervention that, has come up in a lab somewhere that we know works really well, but you bring it into the community and it doesn't take.
Mm,
And why doesn't it take?
yeah,
What are the cultural frameworks that are not matching with the intervention? What are the social norms? What is the ground reality where this intervention that we know is effective is just not taking on? So
right,
that bridging that gap of having an intervention and making it acceptable to communities is what implementation science is. And
makes
so
sense.
but so to try different interventions, you need to have your presence in the community to understand that community, to understand their needs, to understand their frameworks of why something is important, and how they would love for it to be implemented. What will they receive? You can't just take an intervention and shove it down somebody's throat.
Right.
You have to listen to your stakeholders. You have to you have to adapt your intervention so that it works for your stakeholders. Somebody I really admire is Dr. Abhay Bang, and the team with him is his wife, Rani Bang. And Rani Bang is actually works a lot in women and adolescent health. And
Mm,
their thinking really is, there are three categories of research or service. One is for the researcher or the service provider.
mm,
This feels good to me. This will give me fame. This will give me
mm,
notoriety. I can publish my work and get,
yeah.
um, get acknowledged in my circles that are important for me. And then the second type of service or research is, for the community. Not for me, but looking at it from the community's perspective, what is important to the community. And then there's a third type of research in which it is by the community members. So
Yeah.
you are part of the community, and the community is part of your work. And this is a joint endeavor to find solutions that work for the community. And they have done this for neonatal mortality. They were both Hopkins grads. They both did their MPH at Hopkins in the 80s, moved back to India in 1985, and started their work in a village in
Mm.
Maharashtra called Gadcholi. And they have changed the landscape for neonatal survival, worldwide. I mean, their
Wow.
interventions, because they sat with their communities and they
Mhm.
understood what their problems were, and they were integrated into the communities, they lived in the communities, they figured out ways that would, work for the community, and they were able to decrease the rate of neonatal mortality by 75% in a matter of 15 years. So I think that's sort of the approach we have at Public Health Research Institute of India as
Mm.
well, is we have to be part of the community to understand, and then we have to serve the community. And a lot of it is focus group discussions with community members of, does this educational intervention work? What did you understand? What did you not understand? So that's where the research aspect comes in. And
Yeah.
our research not just informs our service, but also other people who provide service in resource limited settings, not just in Mysore, but in our state, in our country, and all over the world, wherever there is a need for this.
Mm.
So I think that's the benefit of publishing your work, is
Oh,
it keeps from people having to reinvent their own wheel and go through interventions that don't work, or
right.
learn at a different way of thinking and adapting of ways that did work. So that's where
Sure.
the research and service sort of come together.
And I imagine that there's even that sort of intermediary, if you will, that where you're somebody who's reading somebody
Mhm.
else's research and saying, hey, I think
Exactly.
a lot of this can apply to this particular demographic, this community, et cetera. And yet, it's also always important to identify, well, what are the nuances just in case,
Right.
right?
Exactly. I think you hit the
So,
nail on the head. Yeah.
yeah.
It is speaking with a community of like-minded people and then adapting uh, findings and positive outcomes into your community and seeing how you can make those work. And there are a lot of different established frameworks of care for health behavior modification, for cervical cancer screening, for vaccination. So there are already a lot of established frameworks of cares that have been validated in multiple low resource settings. So then why reinvent the wheel? Why not,
Right.
use the work that has been done and build upon it and make it more
Yeah.
scalable and take it deeper?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, so much of what we're talking about, I can't help but have this parallel track going of this is applicable to so many things,
Mm,
not just public health, not just medicine directed
mm,
health. It's, education, it's housing, there are so many components and ultimately they're all integrated, right? But I
right,
think that,
right,
just that component, if somebody can be very, very educated, but if you're not getting in there and working and speaking with your community and understanding, it's the same idea of it seems why you got into public health, right? It's
right, right.
not just about solving the issue where the problem comes up. It's how do we change the system that created the problem?
Exactly, exactly. And how do we, during this intersection, the other opportunity that opens up to us is training.
Yeah.
So, we bring in college students, undergraduate students, graduate students from India and all over the world. And then we get energized by the energy and the new way of thinking that they bring. And we also then create the next generation of change makers who can think of things in a logical, more informed way of, and not just going out and blurting out a solution, but like
Mm.
being more strategic about it. And that's a skill you need to hone, and we need to bring up the next generation of change makers. And that's another sort of capacity building arm that we have at the organization as well.
Mm. Beautiful. Well, that's going to be the perfect segue for us for our next section. Let's go ahead and take a quick pause and then we'll dig a little deeper into that. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah, Yasmeen, Shaikh, and we've been having a very enlightening and informative conversation today with Dr. Devanshi Somaiya. And I'd love to welcome in our second guest to join us in the conversation, and that is I get to call her a student. I get to call her mother a dear friend. But we will make the connection of this conversation make all the sense that it needs to. But I'd love to ask Ayana Rao to join us at this time.
Hi.
Hello, Ayana. So the connection, the two of you are certainly going to speak to it much more than I can, but just to kind of get the ball rolling, Ayana, again, not only do I have this connection to you, but we already established Devanshi and your mother, Anjali, are longtime friends. And you had the opportunity, I believe it was last summer, correct?
Yeah.
You were in India on a family trip, but you also knew that you wanted to spend some time volunteering. And I know you started looking at some possibilities of who and what. And I think we know, spoiler alert, where you landed, but tell us about that process.
Yeah, so I was extremely lucky to be able to stay at the PHRII Institute for around 2 weeks. And they taught us so much about like everything to do with the public health sector, but also it just really opened my eyes as to how different it is in the US here and there in rural India. So we saw like very different ways of thinking, very different ways of application. We toured hospitals, and overall it was just a very enlightening experience to see all the differences um, across countries.
Yeah, I bet. And Devanshi, again, yes, there's a personal connection, but you talked about, really bringing in that next generation of change makers. And, Ayana's currently a junior in high school in the States. And I'm just curious, is offering opportunities like what Ayana was able to experience, something that you have as part of your infrastructure, anything that you can speak to, and then maybe about the time that Ayana was there as well.
No, it was lovely having this group of high school students. It was Ayana and six others, and I think they
Okay.
have formed a lifelong friendship bond. They still keep in touch and
Oh, lovely.
socialize, and it's wonderful to see them have a community of live people and not just on a phone. But I think they have that shared experience of learning something completely new, and sort of I can see the dots connect in their minds about, okay, our here we have a world of privilege. I think Ayana will agree. And it's a very different way of thinking. And then here we have a group of children that are in a village that, are grouped together 3 grades at a time, sit at a very meager classroom. And what does that disparity mean? What does it
Mm.
mean for them? What does it mean for me? And what does it mean for a sense of purpose, a sense of meaningfulness, and all of that? So we have hosted graduate and undergraduate students from universities in the US, but this was our first foray into hosting high school students, and watching their eyes light up, and the fun that they had, except and also the learning journey that you can see, these bright students, these bright lights sort of shine even brighter, was so rewarding for us.
Mm.
And so we are offering a high school a program for high school, just for immersion into different culture, different way of life, health, public health, all of those things. They also had like a little marketing class, to how to do a gap
Okay.
analysis, how to communicate,
Oh, very cool.
how to read the room, just basic life skills as well. So that was
Yeah.
great.
The read the room. I'm curious about that. Ayana, what did that mean to you when that concept and how did that? Yes, I making an assumption in my head of what that is, but I would love to hear in your words.
I think they kind of just taught taught us how to kind of communicate with people across like all levels. And we were exposed to so many different people. So they kind of showed us how to communicate effectively with people that we normally wouldn't see, normally wouldn't talk to, and how to kind of break down the barrier, of course, like language, but also across different levels of privilege. And
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine just like cultural sensitivity, privacy issues, things of that sort that sometimes are spoken, sometimes aren't. And so, what an awesome just skill, like you said, life skills. I mean, it's relative to the work as you described, Devanshi, but my goodness, I mean, what if we could all have that a little bit more in our lives day to day? That's fantastic. Yeah. Anything else either of you would like to talk about as far as that particular time? Ayana, as you now, you had that experience in India. You came back, you more or less jumped back into your next school year. How does this stay with you, and what if any seeds has it planted for you? I certainly don't want to lead you to an answer. I think too often, frankly, young people are asked about what they want to do or are expected to have some idea way too early in life. But I'm just, yeah, what if anything did it open your mind and possibilities to?
So going into the program, I was kind of confused, as were many of the other students, as to what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to do something with science. And then after that program, it really like opened my eyes to how many different aspects there are of health and medicine. It's not just one strict route that you have to go. It's like becoming a doctor and studying for so long. There's so many different levels that we learned at PHRII. And so after that program, I think it really like resonated with me that I don't have to go to med school and study all of this just to do something that I love. They showed me that there's so many different opportunities and careers that I can explore. So I think that was really, really helpful with me in deciding what I want to do in the future.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Devanshi, I'd love to sort of throw it back to you. We're going to certainly come back to you, Ayana. But I'd love to just know, in the sort of near and or far future, what,
Mhm.
if anything, are, how obviously there's a lot of data that I'm certain is collected and analyzed and such, but in that data and looking at the efficacy of what is being offered and such currently through the Institute, what are you looking to hold on to, go deeper in? Is there an area that you haven't been able to, whether, and I should say area could be geographic, could be a particular focus in health, public health, anything that just sort of gives you an indication of where you think the Institute is going in the short and or long-term future?
So, I was trained as a medical doctor. I know how to do individual levels of care. I know how to set up medical programs of care, right? Let's take cervical cancer screening, for instance. So, cervical cancer is a silent problem in India. Just as
Mm.
like 100,000 women die of breast cancer, almost the same number of women die of cervical cancer. A woman
Wow.
dies every 7 to 8 minutes from cervical cancer. Yet there's all this talk about breast cancer and breast cancer prevention, and there isn't much talk about cervical cancer because
Mm.
it's more stigmatized. When we say a woman dies every 7 minutes, it's 80,000 women that die every year. And a majority of these women are younger women, women with, adolescent children. So it
Wow.
not just destroys the woman's life, but it
Yeah.
destroys families, communities, all of that, right? So I realized I had to step outside my comfort zone and not just stick to, well, I know medicine. I know how to set up a medical program, small
Mm.
scale or large scale, and this is what I'm going to stick to. If I was going to make an impact in this area, I had to step outside my comfort zone and find, okay, what are the gaps? Here I have a perfectly good medical program, but why is it not working? Try explaining cancer to a a
Mm.
rural woman, who has never been to school, who is struggling to make ends meet, and why it is important to prevent cancer 10 years down the road by
Mm.
acting today. It's a challenging concept. And so we have to, I realized I had to step outside medicine and sort of start thinking, um, melding common sense solutions to again establish research-based interventions and finding where they intersect and bringing them into my community. So there's the
Mm.
screening process, but there is a gap analysis, education and awareness, capacity building before the screening process.
Right.
And then there is continuing care and monitoring and evaluation after the screening process.
Right. Depending on the
So,
outcomes of the screening, right?
right, right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you don't have quality assurance, your program sort of falls apart and
Right.
fizzles out over the next 2 or 3 years. So then coming up with the toolkit, an entire toolkit of all of these five components, is what our focus is right now. And when we come up with toolkits, let's say for gap analysis, right? These are the questions you should be looking into in terms of understanding where your community stands and what their gaps are. North
Mm.
India is very different from South India. Africa is different from India. You can't have a cookie cutter approach, but here's a whole list of domains you need to look into, and you can adapt these domains into your cultural context. So how do you do a gap analysis when you build an educational package, right? You can't address everybody's concern in one 30-minute video, for instance.
Right.
What are the most common misconceptions or educational gaps in your region? And what is that list that you need to look at and explore in every community, and then customize your package according to what shows up on your list?
Yeah.
So it's that. Then it's capacity building. And capacity building, fortunately, can go across regions, right? If I have a Zoom video on how to read a pap smear, then that's something that can cut across cultures and communities and contexts.
Mm.
So there is the technical infrastructure building for capacity, and then there's the personnel, both in terms of equipment and personnel
Mm.
that you need SOPs, you need program guides, you need, and so there's again that there's no reason for everybody to write the same thing over and over
Right.
again. You
Right.
can create that in your toolkit about, here are the standard SOPs, adapt to your region. Here are the standard program guidances, adapt to your region. And then there's the actual running of the program and what works, what doesn't work. So we came up with screening for women. Most of us, when we've had our cervical cancer screen, we've had a pap smear. We go into the
Mm.
doctor's office and we have to take off our clothes. We have to open up our legs in front of a person we don't meet very often or have never
Yeah.
met before. And they collect a sample, and it's not a very comfortable procedure. And then they send it off to a lab. And 2 weeks later, we get a notice saying that everything is fine or something is not fine. You need to come back for a second evaluation.
Right.
Then we take time off work. We go in for that second evaluation. And sometimes we get followed, sometimes we get treated. So you have to take that whole process
Yeah.
off and put a big X in a
Yeah.
rural community in
Yeah.
India because
Right.
you don't have the facility, that none of that is feasible, right? So we came up with a Q-tip test, very similar to a COVID test. You put the COVID Q-tip in your
Yeah.
nose, you run around for 15 seconds, and then you
Huh.
put it in a thing and you run a test, right? We're very similar to that. We came up with a self-collection test,
Wow.
for women in India that we do in their homes, at their doorstep, in their villages, and they don't have to take their clothes off and
Yeah.
come somewhere. And so programs, and this is endorsed by the WHO, it's called self-collection for the HPV virus test. It's
Okay.
endorsed by the WHO. So coming up with again program guidance for things
Wow.
like that. In where do you treat? The algorithms are complicated. If this, then that, this, then you go down this path in terms of clinical medicine. Again, you can package it all, put it in a toolkit, wrap it with a bow, and then have it ready for people to adapt in their regions. In order to penetrate different communities, you also have to put your PR hat on.
Yeah.
And you have to, speak with different people from different contexts and understand what their gaps are, offer what you have to fill those gaps, and then take from them as well. So you develop this symbiotic relationship. So I'm having a ball. I'm doing so much more than medicine. It's
Yeah.
intellectual stimulation and challenge every single
Ooh.
day, day in and day out. I am not an extrovert. I like
Wow.
showing up to
Yeah.
clinic, doing my work, and feeling good
Mm.
about the quality of service I provide. But I have learned how to be an extrovert and ask for money, and network with people, and do this thing of mutual learning. I can't hide behind a screen. I have to
Yeah.
shake hands and I have to meet with people. And that's been a growing process for me as well.
Mm. Ah, let's take our final pause here and then we'll come back in and definitely bring you back into the conversation too, Ayana. Welcome back to Heartistry. This is Farah, Yasmeen, Shaikh, and today I am in conversation. We've been mainly speaking with Dr. Devanshi Somaiya, and we recently had Ayana Rao also join the conversation. And I want to talk a little bit more. Not only again did Ayana have that time, volunteering, being in a program where she was on the ground with the institute in India last summer of 2024. But Ayana, you also, as I've mentioned a couple of times, am I get to be your teacher, your Kathak teacher, and you've been training with me since I want to say 2016, 17, right? And you're currently a junior in high school. And as a reflection of not just the duration that you've trained, but really the commitment that you've made to your study of Kathak and the ever deepening of that, an opportunity was presented to you to endeavor into your first Kathak solo performance, of which you are doing in less than a couple of months now, in June of 2025. And this is something we often hear of in Arangetram, in Bharatanatyam. In Kathak, we don't have it so, if you will, institutionalized in the same way. But it is something that I certainly did. I was 30 years old when I did mine because I started
Wow.
Kathak much later than you did, Ayana. But the point is it's really meant to be, and as you know, Ayana, what do we call our program for our solo?
Manzil ki andaz.
And I should qualify, please don't feel bad. Ayana's coming off of a little bit of a cold. So if her voice breaks or she has to cough a little bit, we get it. 'Tis the season, which seems like year round these days. But yes, Manzil ke andaz. And, my father helped me to come up with that name, which we're loosely translating as the many aspects of one's journey. And because when I described it to my father and I sort of knew I wanted the words in Urdu, I was like, I don't want it to be about a graduation. I don't want it to be about a completion, but almost an acknowledgement of this deep process, not just leading up to the performance as far as the performance itself, but really all that is culminated for you to get to this point. And hopefully the ultimate goal is to help awaken the dancer to the possibility of this being a lifelong journey, hopefully in relationship with the dance, but in our lives in general. It's all the things that we put into it that create the journey that we're on, right? And Devanshi, you spoke to that so beautifully in many, many ways and phases of your life. Ayana, like, I can't help but get a little emotional because that's just how I roll. But hearing you talk about even this time that you had in India, and just the way that all of this feeds into who we are. And I'm going to throw it back to you now because you made a decision alongside your family that, yes, you're doing this solo and you're going to have live musical accompaniment, all of these things. There are going to be ticket sales for it. And but you decided as a family that you wanted the proceeds from your concert, your performance, to go to a very particular place. Can you talk a little bit about who and what that is and why?
Yeah, I chose to donate the proceeds of the ticket sales to PHRII. Um, I think I was just so shocked to learn that one woman dies every 7 to 8 minutes of cervical cancer, and it's just something that we don't hear at all. Like Devanshi Pachi said, we hear so much about breast cancer and different types of cancer, but I feel like cervical cancer is so overlooked because of the fact that it's like a woman's illness. Um, and so I think the work that PHRII does is extremely important. I think they're set to screen around 5,000 women this year alone. And
Wow.
I think that it's just so fundamental in maintaining, like, of course, women's health, but also increasing trust and awareness for future generations so that they're able to come and get screened and to like spread the word in rural India. So I know that the donations will be used extremely well in PHRII. They're doing amazing work that I think is so unique and rare, and I haven't seen another foundation like that. So I just the work that they did that I was able to see in the short time I was there really touched me, and it really made me want to donate the tickets, any small part that I can to help them.
Hmm.
It is
Devanshi, your
beautiful.
thoughts? Yeah.
That is just, I mean, to see somebody that I have seen as a baby grow up and then become this beautiful young woman whose mind is so open and kind, it just, it means the world to me. I'm very touched by her thoughtfulness and her kindness and her generosity. And again, she's putting her sweat equity into something she believes in, and that
And
makes
literally
me
her sweat.
yes, yes. And it goes beyond, mouthing the words, right? Like sometimes many of us do. It it's putting your money where your mouth is, or putting your action where your mouth is. And it's very touching, and we're very, very grateful for
Yeah.
your thoughtfulness, Ayana. It makes me so proud.
Hmm. Yes. Well, and I have to say, even from my vantage point of the way that I hope the arts um, can and will always be a vehicle for social change. And,
Mhm.
sometimes it's in the messaging that we present through the artistic medium. Um, and sometimes it's quite literally in the art itself helping to raise funds for. And so, ironically, Ayana, you're kind of doing both because we've already spoken about the proceeds, but I think it's also such a reflection of who you are. And Devanshi, I don't know if you're going to be able to join us. I know are you going
I
to be back
will.
in June?
Yes,
Yay,
yes. I'm coming back
fantastic.
just for this. How can I not?
I'm
I'm
so
coming back to
happy
the
to
Bay
hear
Area.
that.
Yes.
So happy to
No.
hear that. Well, I won't give too much away. And Ayana, I'm going to say a little bit. It's totally in your hands to add to this. But even in some of the messaging and the themes that we're exploring in your solo, I think is also a way that the arts can, again, bring about awareness, reflection, critical thinking. And so maybe don't give everything away, but feel free if you want to add to anything and offer any teasers of your choice about how you're approaching the content of your performance.
I think growing up surrounded by so many strong feminists, such as both of you and my mom, has very like strongly guided me into what message I really want to show. So I did my best to try, and me and Farah Didi did our best to try and convey that through the pieces in my solo. So stay tuned.
Yes, yes, I love it. You
Go
didn't
girl
say too
power, go girl power. I also want to acknowledge the men in your family.
Yes.
And they're very non-traditional in terms of how secure they are and how much they have encouraged us all, to be and men and women have to work together to make communities better, healthier, and art and science have to come together. And so this is just perfect blend of so many different things that make up the goodness in our communities.
Yes.
Perfectly said. Well, this takes me to my last question for both of you. And by all means, you've already given infinite number of responses to this question I'm about to pose. But essentially, I'd love to close my conversations with guests on the podcast by asking them to take a moment to reflect on this concept of heartistry. Obviously, it's the word heart and artistry put together. It's not something I came up with. I think somewhere, somehow I'd seen it. And then it just struck me as that would just be a really beautiful name for the podcast. And for me specifically, it's been about speaking with individuals who bring a passion, compassion, and commitment to whatever they do. And yes, I do get to speak with a lot of artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, people really in all walks of life. Professionally, I'm also very intentional about it doesn't have to be something that's generating income to check a box. But I'm always curious to know from my guests if whether as I'm speaking about it now or when you first saw this word, heartistry, what, if anything, it invokes for you. So, Ayana, maybe we'll start with you.
I think throughout my life, I've done music, I've done dance, and I think the arts has always been something that I can kind of escape to, away from like academics and like social things. I think like when I dance, it kind of blocks everything out for me. So I really resonate with heartistry because it's kind of like my truest self when I'm dancing.
Beautiful. Yeah. Devanshi, how about you?
So I think we all manifest our passions differently. I think what drives us, what gives us meaning, what gives us a purpose, what gives us a reason to wake up is that deep-seated passion. It's either, you know, for a beautiful cause, or is it something that makes us angry, or something that we feel aligns with our ethics and our morality. And it starts from there. It grows and nurtures and ruminates in that feeling. And then we all sort of manifest that feeling in a different ways. For some of it is art. For some of us who are less endowed in those areas, it is, the application of science, right? So, but it starts from the heart. Where we expend ourselves is going to be different for each one of us, and what we are honed in and what we have our capacities in, but it always starts from here. And that's what gives us a direction in which we try to grow for the remainder of our life.
Thank you. Thank you both. And clearly, there's no one way to answer that question. Certainly not a right or a wrong. But I just love. I can't even tell you the various responses. How they all just sort of just fill a void I didn't even realize I had in the concept. So thank you for sharing yours. And ultimately, thank you for your time today. Devanshi, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and I'm thrilled to know we will meet in person very soon. Ayana, I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation with all three of us in it, and so glad that your mom, made this connection for me. And needless to say, I will echo Devanshi's words. So very proud of you and so excited for what's to come, not just in a couple months, but into the unforeseeable future.
Thank you.
Yeah. But really,
thank you both.
Yeah.
No, for giving us. It's always great when three women can sit down and talk heart to heart and learn something new about a different way of being, and appreciate the opportunity. And of course, Ayana, couldn't be prouder to be on this platform. Being here with you is wonderful, and love that I have a new friend in you, Farah.
Yes, same. Well, again, until the next time, virtually or in shared real time, Ayana, any final thoughts? Looked like you might have wanted to say something. No, okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, both of you, for your time today on Heartistry.
Thank you.